This is Research Like a Pro, episode 188, Revisiting Source Citations Again. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go! Hi everybody, welcome to Research Like a Pro.
Hi Nicole, and hello to everyone listening. We're so glad to have you here with us again today. We are continuing our series on revisiting the Research Like a Pro process, and today we are going to tackle source citations. So if you're still struggling with source citations, hopefully this episode will give you some clarity. It's episode 117 was our original, and we'll come back at the end and give you some thoughts on source citations.
Today we are talking about source citations.
I know that for a lot of people, they really do not like the idea of doing source citations because it slows them down. It's much more fun just to research, and click around. But that way of researching is what has given a lot of us problems in the past where we found records and have no idea how to go back and find them again. So let's just talk about the reasoning, because I think if we understand why we should do source citations, it can be motivational to do them. So it gives us a chance to track our research, positive and negative. And whenever I ask people I'm working with if they have ever searched for a source in the same database, they all just nod their heads and laugh, because we all know that if we don't actually record somewhere that we didn't find our record, we will eventually circle back and try to find it again in that same record. So it really does save us time, even though we may begrudge those few minutes we create a source citation in a research log. If we just do it, then that source is taken care of. And then we also want to make sure others can follow our pathway, and ourselves. We want to make sure we can revisit a source if we need to. So it helps us get back to a source or others. And quite honestly, when we do a source citation, we have to dig in and understand that source better. Often I will have to go to the very beginning of the microfilm, read some of the front matter, and all of that deepens your understanding. It's amazing how creating a citation helps you get so much more out of the source, which for anyone who's a serious researcher is a huge motivation to write good source citations. And then it shows reasonably exhaustive research. If we are going to put together a proof argument saying this is why we believe this ancestor is connected to this ancestor, we really need to be able to show we've done our due diligence. We have researched all the records. If we say something like, there's just no marriage record in this county, well, who's going to believe us unless we have the 5 source citations there of everything we've checked? So it really shows that we have done good research. And it just gives credibility to our work. I think we've all seen family histories or those biographies that don't have any citations, and you just wonder where this information came from. And we all are wishing there was a citation there to something to help us know. So many good reasons to do source citations.
Yeah, that last one about giving credibility to your work is really important, because unless you're planning on not doing anything with what you learn in your research, you're going to want to have some kind of work product or output for what you find, somewhere to put your conclusion. And a lot of people just put their conclusions into an online tree, and often there will be no citations associated with that. And so that's a problem, because undocumented trees are not usually given as much weight or credibility. So if you want your work to seem credible, you do need to add those source citations. And if you're planning on making anything outside of a family tree, like a report or some kind of document, then you're going to want to have your citations ready to add to that document after you do your research. And so the way that we do it is, as soon as we look at a document, we save a citation in our notes or our research log. So where do we typically put our citations? Research logs, research notes, research reports, proof arguments. If we do presentations, then we add citations to our slides and our syllabi. And if we're creating a family history book or a blog post, we will add citations to those. Charts and tables where we show census data, we add a citation to the bottom of that table. And lineage society applications, those will need to have source citations as well. So if you will create a citation in your research log as you research, you'll be prepared to create all kinds of work samples like these that you can then share with others, and it will show the credibility of your research.
And when you listen to that list, it really brings home the fact that there are so many places we can put these. And I love to have that source citation in my research log so I can put it in those various places. So helpful. Now, let's just talk for a minute about source and source citation. A source is whatever gives you information. So, usually we're using documents or books, microfilm, articles. In some cases, we might use a photograph, or we could use a sampler. We could use something that's an actual object, like a medal from a war. So many different things that can be a source. And it's important when we are writing and putting our information out there that we have some kind of a citation that goes along with that. You know, in our online genealogy world now, some of the websites give us a source citation, and some of those are fairly good, and we may want to tweak them a bit. But you may have a source in your genealogy drawer or in your files that you have to actually create your own source citation for. And so that's why it's so important just to understand the philosophy behind it and the different pieces. Here's an example of a source citation from my Nancy Briscoe project. We're actually going to use 3 examples from that project. And in my Nancy Briscoe project, I used maps, census records, county histories, her pension application, a birth register, a compiled service record, an online encyclopedia article, and find a grave. So you can see I had quite a few different types of sources, but every single one of those in the final report has a citation that would show anybody exactly where I got that piece of information. One of the examples that we'll use is her pension application, and this one was off of the Oklahoma Digital Prairie website, and it did not come with a citation. I had to actually create the citation, and this was a 10 to 12 page PDF with several documents included in it. So we'll use this as an example. It's a layered citation, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But just want to make a note that after we have created our full citation, in our reports, we don't always want to use the entire full citation. So after we do the full citation once, then we can do a shortened form. And that is really helpful for this specific example because my citation was kind of lengthy for that application. Pensions can be lengthy. So here's my full citation for that application. Nancy E. Fraser, widow of Richard Fraser, application number A2988, 1915 to 1924, pension number P1077, record group 5, digital images, Confederate Pension Records Database, Oklahoma Digital Prairie, and then the URL, access 20 January 2019, citing Commissioner of Confederate Pensions, Oklahoma State Archives, Oklahoma Department of Libraries, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Okay, so that is on my screen about 6 lines long. That's a long citation, but when I want to continue citing information from that, I've just shortened it greatly. I just now have for my shortened citation, Nancy E. Fraser, widow of Richard Fraser, and then I give the specific application number. So I can take away all the publication information because if anybody wants to know that, they can go right back to that first citation. So it's just kind of a key thing to understand that once you cite it, you don't have to continue citing the full thing.
Yeah, that's really nice when you have finished your report and you can go back through and shorten some of the citations. And it's not a good time to shorten your citations before you finished editing.
Yes, because you sometimes move your material around in that report, and it's good to wait till the end.
All right, so Genealogy Standards names 5 elements that a citation should include. And Tom Jones elaborates on this in his book, Mastering Genealogical Documentation. We can look at that book and kind of get some more details if you're interested. Let's go through the 5 elements. The first one is who. So, who created the source? And often the creator of genealogical records that we use is a government or a religious entity like a county or a parish. And if it's a book, it's the name of the author. And sometimes it's the name of the informant if it's a court document, like some person's deposition. So you'll see all different kinds of who created the source. And sometimes the who created the source is repeated in the citation again for the publication information. And if that's the case, if the who created it and the publisher is the same, then you don't need to repeat the name of the entity twice. So if you look at a source citation and you don't see that the lead element is a who, then it's probably because the who created the source is repeated already in the citation as the publisher. So, an example of the who created the source for a book would be the author. So, in the county history example that Diana used in her report, the county history author was J.A. Sturges. And in a reference note citation, you do not start with the last name of the author. You just put their first name and then their last name. And if you're doing a source list citation, like a bibliography, then you put the author's last name first. So just remember that for reference note citations like footnotes and endnotes that we typically are using for our reports and things, that you can just put first name and last name. And then for a census, you will start off typically with 1850 census. So you might be wondering who created the source. So, Diana, what would you say to that?
Well, with the United States federal censuses, you could be kind of redundant and you could say United States federal government, 1850 US Census. But because that is such a well-known source and we all understand that the United States federal government created the census, we don't need to put the who. We can just simply put the 1850 US Census. So there are some examples where we just have to use our common sense and think, okay, I don't need to repeat this over and over. Another example is find a grave. So in a find a grave citation, find a grave creates it, but then there will be a find a grave memorial. Sometimes you could list it 3 times in a citation, and you just have to think, okay, do I really need to be so redundant and list this over and over again? So I really love Elizabeth Shown Mill's quote, "Art citation is an art, not a science," because I think we have to look at our citations and think, okay, does this make sense? Do I need to repeat this over and over? Is it understood? Who created it? Or do I really need to spell it out?
Yeah, that's a really good point to be able to eliminate redundancy as you see fit. So, for the census, going back to that, you're right. I think it is really clear that the United States government created this census record. So, we could lead off with United States government or United States of America, comma 1850 US Census. But instead, the who and the what are kind of merged into 1850 US Census.
Right. So common sense, I think, really works well for us when we're doing our citations.
And just
So
making a template and not having to think about it ever again.
exactly. I love my citation templates. Once you've created that good citation, save it in your template and then just fill in the blanks every time you use that source. So we've talked about who created it. Now let's talk about what is the source. And this is where we describe the source. And in a census, this could be the specifics. You know, it's the 1830 census, the 1850 census, or it's a marriage record, or it's a letter. If it's a book, then we do the entire title. So for our example of the county history for the Nancy Briscoe project, we had J.A. Sturges identified as the who, as the author, and then after his name, in italics, because it is published, is the entire title. Illustrated History of McDonald County, Missouri, from the earliest settlement to the present time. And italics just signals to us that it is a publication. It's so helpful when I am reviewing other citations when I see that, because I realize this is a book. I could go to a library, I could purchase this book, I could find this book somewhere. So really important to sort of understand when to use italics and when to use quotation marks. And I know that gets confusing and people think, why do I even have to bother? But just remember, italics is for publications. Publications could be a newspaper, could be a magazine, could be a book, lots of different things that a publication could be that would be italicized. Now, sometimes we want to use quotation marks, and quotation marks are when we set off something that's within a publication. So I just did this project where I use a lot of newspaper articles. So I would start off with the title of the little article, and maybe it's just obituary of your subject. Or sometimes those old newspapers, they've got really interesting titles. A man run over by a horse, something like that. You put that in quotation marks, and then after that, you have the title of the newspaper, which is in italics because that's the published part. Maybe you've got a chapter in a book that's been published and you just want to cite that chapter. That goes in quotes. The title of the book goes in italics. It can be confusing. You just have to get a couple of these rules in your head. Now, you might be using an unpublished narrative and the author has given it a title. I have some family histories where my great aunts titled it. And so I put that title in quotes, and they are the creators of it. So their name goes first and then their narrative in quotes. So when would you not use quotation marks in figuring out the what? Well, one of the things that we use a lot in genealogy are unpublished record books. So think of the marriage register in the town, or think of the deed book in the county. Those types of things are unpublished. They were standard books that were given to the counties, and the county clerk filled in the information. So those would not need quotation marks. They're not published. They're just basically record books. There is an exception that Tom Jones makes in Mastering Genealogical Documentation on page 75 that I think is really interesting. He says, when researchers have a reason to draw a reader's attention to a title or something within it, like a title to a record within a pension file, we could put quotes around it. So say, for instance, you're using a pension file and there's a special document in there and you want to really point out that you're using this special document, like maybe an affidavit of a witness, you could put quotes around it. So this kind of makes me think that there's an exception to every rule, right? Even in making citations.
That's interesting. Yeah. I think it's good to know the general principle that we don't need to use quotation marks when we're describing an unpublished record book, but that if we want to draw attention to a title, then go ahead. Now let's go on to the next element, the when. This refers to the question, when was the source created or when did the event occur? And sometimes you include both of those. Be specific, include the day, the month, and the year if you can. For a book, this will be the date of publication, so that's typically just a year. And then for a census, you don't typically see the full date of the census put into the citation. So it'll just say 1850 US Census.
Right. And the when is usually a pretty easy one to discover, right? So I like that some of these are easy to figure out. So let's talk about the where within is the information located. So think of that source. Maybe it was a book. This is where you get to cite the page number. Or if it's a newspaper article, you would cite the page of the newspaper. Sometimes in newspapers, I even like to do the column and the paragraph. Some of those old newspapers are so difficult to find things on, and anything that can help us to figure out where in that source the information is can be great. So in a census, we typically do the household number, or if it's before 1850, we can do the line number of the head of household. I like to err on the side of maybe adding too much information because so many times I will see a citation that directs you to the collection and the name, but then there's no image number, there's no page number, and I really don't want to scroll through 500 images trying to find that specific record. So we want to make sure we're really nice and specific on this where within is the information located. Looking at some of our examples that we're using, that county history book, after I cited the title and the publication information, I have the page number, page 74, directing whoever is reading this to that specific piece of information that I used from that book. Now, just a note, if I wanted to continue using information from that book, we could go back to that shortened citation idea and do a shortened citation and then just keep changing the page number to whatever item of information I'm using. So when we do shortened citations, even if we're pointing to a different page within that source, we can still use the shortened citation, which is really nice to know. Now, in that pension application of Nancy Briscoe, as I mentioned, it is 10 pages long, and as in any pension, it has so much information. She states her marriage. She states a lot of information about her husband's Civil War service. So many little things that I can pull out of that for evidence of her life. And so I would want to make sure that I'm specifically citing a page number within that application, page 2 of the application or page 10 of that application, so that anyone trying to follow my footsteps wouldn't have to go through the entire thing trying to figure out where I got that information from.
That's good. The next element is where in the world is the source located? This is usually going to be the publisher's location or the URL or the location of the document if it's unpublished. So for a book, that's really easy. You just need to put in the location of the publisher. So usually it's the city and state where that publisher is from so that you can go find that publisher if you need to and get a copy of that book. But typically you don't need to do that because you can just look it up in a library. But that was, I think, the intent. And then for a census, what you put in for that is the city, county, and township. Usually you start off with the county and the state, and then you tell whether or not it's a population schedule or not, and then you tell the township. So it's good to look at some examples for the census because there's kind of a set way of how the census is cited since it's such a popular source. For layered citations, you're going to want to put the website that published that image and the URL. The website that published it is a lot of the elements. It's the who and who published it and where to find it. So sometimes it seems a little repetitive, but you can put in the complete URL or you can put in the URL of the homepage, and then the reader can use waypoints if you use those or the other information in order to locate that specific page on the website.
Right. You mentioned layered citations just a little bit, so let's talk a little bit more about those. And we did do an entire episode on layered citations. So if any of you are new to the podcast and you're interested in those, you can see episode 103 for an entire episode on layered citations. And we did that because so much of the material we're using requires a layered citation. So let's just talk a little bit about that on this episode. A layered citation is what you do when you have got a physical source, and I'm going to use this pension application of Nancy Briscoe for the example. It's a physical application, but it's been digitized and now it's available online. So we want to include both pieces of that. We have the physical part and then the digital part, and we use a semicolon to signal the difference where one ends and one begins. Think of this punctuation marks, like the commas separate pieces and then the semicolon separates the layers. And it's just like reading a paragraph. Would you want to read a paragraph in a book with absolutely no punctuation? I've read some books like that where it's, stream of consciousness, and it's so difficult to read and annoying. So think of your citation that same way. You're trying to give your reader some help in putting in that good punctuation. So let's take apart that pension application. The first layer, I decided to lead with the physical. And this is sometimes just up to you. Do you want to lead with the digital or lead with the physical? But I decided I wanted to start with the physical part. So if I were to go to the Oklahoma State Archives, I could use this portion of the citation to see the real paper copy. And so that's the part that says Nancy Fraser, widow of Richard Fraser, gives the application number, the record group, the specific pension number. That's all physical, and that's a semicolon. And then after that, I have the digital layer, and I say digital images, then in quotes, Confederate Pension Records Database. And I put that in quotes because that is what the website has called this collection. It's given it a title, so it goes into quotes. And then Oklahoma Digital Prairie is in italics. That is the publisher. That's the name of the website. Then in parentheses, I've got the URL and the access date. So I've got just the physical, just the digital, and then I have a third layer on this, and I'm starting to do this more and more, where we cite exactly where that physical part came from. And I like to do it at the end because I just like it at the end. So I say citing Commissioner of Confederate Pensions, Oklahoma State Archives, and that it's in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. So I tend to do 3 layers a lot. Sometimes my third layer is the Family History Library microfilm number, or sometimes it might be something like citing the National Archives, the UK, or just wherever this original stuff is coming from.
Wow, that was a great explanation of layered citations. And these are so important to do in our work. There are some other citation formats that I referred to earlier, so let's go over those. The two main types that we use are reference notes and source list entries. And reference notes are the ones that we typically use in our family trees and in our research reports because they can give evidence of a specific fact, such as the date or place of an event. They take us to a very specific page, a specific line that provides that piece of information. Whereas a source list entry is the information about the source in general, maybe about the book or a collection, but it doesn't give a specific page number or detailed information about what we're citing. So a reference note is kind of the norm for our genealogical source citations when we're citing a specific fact. So the examples we've used in this episode today have all been reference note citations. So we recommend that you use these as footnotes in your articles, your books, or your research reports. Some people also use them as endnotes at the end of a chapter or an article or book. However, that introduces separation between the information and the source citation. So we don't recommend endnotes for that reason, because if somebody copies 1 or 2 pages from your book, then they won't have the citations that go along with those pages. So we recommend footnotes at the bottom of each page. And a source list entry is usually found at the end of a book or an article. It can sometimes be put at the beginning of a research report to let the client or the readers know which sources were consulted during this research session. You typically will arrange the source list entries in alphabetical order by the last name of the creator of that source, or just in order based on the creator's name if it's a government entity.
Right. And if you go to conferences or watch webinars, you're often given a handout. So pay attention to the source list at the end of those handouts. Often the presenter will have a really nice list of everything that they've used or further sources to learn about, and just kind of take a look and see how that is organized. And it should be with the author's name last and everything lined up alphabetically. So that's one place that we see that a lot in our genealogy world, or in those handouts. So let's talk about where you create and record your source citation. Well, I've said this many, many times that our source citations live in our research log because it just makes sense. You are working through your research plan and you're entering your information into your research log. That's where you can create your source citation. I will just tell you, when you go to write your report, you will be so happy that you already have that citation done. You're in the middle of writing and you have the creative juices flowing, and the last thing you want to do is go find that source again and create the citation right then. That's not very fun. I love it when I've got everything ready to go and I can just write. So create it in your research log. And then if you want to put it into your database, we get this question a lot. What do I do about all those templates in my genealogy database? I'm using some program and I don't want to use those. Well, sometimes you can use a free-form template. Some databases will let you just copy and paste in free-form what you've created. One of the workarounds that I've done is just to take half of my citation and put it in the title field and the other half in the author field, because I like to be in control of my citations. Using the templates is better than nothing, and I'm not going to say don't do that, but I do like to be more in control, so I like to create mine in my research log and then put it into my database. I kind of have to be creative. And then, of course, if you're uploading documents that you might have in your files to your online trees, you'll want to have a nice citation. And you can just copy and paste from your research log straight to that online tree, and it will show anybody who sees that document exactly where it came from, and they'll be so appreciative. I know I am, and I'm also very frustrated when I see great documents and I don't know where they came from. That's difficult. Then I just have to cite what I'm seeing, on the tree. But so much better to have the original source. So we really encourage you all to start doing source citations. Even if it doesn't sound very fun, you'll feel so proud of yourself if you do.
And it will give you freedom to create wonderful work products, research reports, and articles and books that you can share with your family. Now, one note that I just thought of about creating source citations and sharing your document images online is that if you're posting Bible pages up online, it would be great to include a source citation with that as well. And one of the important things to include in those Bible pages is where that Bible has been since the author of that Bible family record created it, because that can really be helpful information for understanding the source. And there's different handwritings in that source, kind of figuring out who wrote that. And I found a bunch of Bible pages online for a hypothesized ancestor from the 1700s who were actually loyalists who left North Carolina during the American Revolution and went down to the Bahamas. And so all of the births of the children were recorded on the islands down in the Bahamas. And it was fascinating. And I just wanted a citation that told who had held this Bible, the provenance of the Bible, where it had been kept. And so when you're adding those awesome special family records like that to your ancestry trees, please include a citation and talk about the chain of possession.
I totally agree with that. So many things to think about.
And I'm so thankful for all of the Bible pages that people and families have shared online, because those are kind of a special record that are often kept privately by people at home, but they can provide so much insight into our really distant ancestors.
Yes, they can prove our hypotheses or they can disprove our hypotheses, which either way, it's good to know the truth about these family relationships. All right, well, I hope you all enjoyed that discussion of source citations from the Nancy Briscoe Project and learning more about the 5 elements of a citation. And one of the things I just wanted to mention was that it does get easier. I think we can all attest to the fact that the first time we do citations, they seem so hard and they just get easier and easier. And those templates that we mentioned are huge. I know every time I'm doing a project, the first thing I open is my source citation template. It's just so great to have it there.
I agree. And, I was thinking that one of the things that's helped me the most with citations is being in a study group and reviewing each other's citations and giving feedback and receiving feedback on those citations, because you can see how other people create them and everyone has a little bit of a different way of doing it. But then there's some things that are kind of standard. And so you can comment on those and receive comments on there. You really should always be commas separating the elements and semicolons separating layers, or the fact that the word census is usually lowercase because it's not the actual title that we're using in the citation. Comments like that are things I've learned in the study group. So it's really nice to have feedback on those.
Yeah, I agree. Peer review is really important in our work. We can just be struggling along on our own without any idea of how well we're doing or what mistakes we're making. And then when we get some peer review, it can help us so much. So that's a great point. Well, one little thing I wanted to add for an update is the fact that when we use Airtable for citations, we want to make sure that we have customized that field and use long text and then use enable rich text formatting. And that lets you have italics because we want to use the italics to show publication. It's one of our standards for citations, and so that's how you do it in Airtable. The other thing I really love about using Airtable and creating citations there is I always expand the cell. So rather than typing in this little tiny cell, I expand it, and then it's just like a nice big window on my computer. It makes it so much easier for me to see all the little things for the citation. Like before, when I was trying to do the citation in a smaller cell on Google Sheets, sometimes you just couldn't see that you'd forgotten a comma or you'd messed up on an apostrophe. So it's nice to expand and have a little bit more room to see your citation.
Absolutely. It's like typing into a document rather than typing into a little square, and everything disappears as you keep typing because you can't see what you typed before.
Right, right. So, anyway, keep practicing with citations, everyone. We hope you keep trying because I promise they will get easier and they'll get better. And they make you feel so accomplished as a genealogist when you create your citations.
All right, everyone. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books, Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at familylocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at familylocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.